Okay, yeah, you can go ahead and share now.
There we go. Okay, perfect.
Okay.
All right, is that everybody able to see my screen? I'm going to take.
Yes, we are.
Awesome. Cool. So let me also get the chat open here just in case there are any questions or anything. And it looks like it's a smaller group, so definitely don't be shy about, asking me to slow down. It's fine with me if you just unmute and ask questions directly. That's the easiest while I can't see everybody because I have the code in front of me. But yeah, so just kind of a quick recap of what we already talked about. We basically went through the, I'll just go to external draw, the kind of reason for options among the front end frameworks and the problems they solve. As a part of this, we kind of talked about the MVC architecture versus the single page application architecture. And then we went into Vue. It's been around for a while. We can kind of see how it stacks up against other frameworks and the kinds of things you can do with it. And that's kind of where we got to. So I'd like to kind of retread a little bit of the ground we covered when I set up this really basic to-dos app with Vue. I mentioned that there was like a big release this February. This is Vue3. And there's a really interesting change to their API there called the composition API. And this is something I'd kind of like to cover in a little bit of detail, just what's different about it, what it means, what the old options API looks like. Because I think it's actually a really interesting and positive change to the framework. It kind of introduces some different like mental models for how you're meant to interact with your data. And I think in a lot of ways, it's a little bit more declarative. And so I'm hoping we can talk a little bit about what declarativity is. And I mean, it's a word you're going to hear a lot in the front end space. So I think it's worth comparing declarative mental models versus imperative. But to start, let's just kind of walk through the initial setup steps for a new Vue app. And this time I'll do it with the intent that if you're looking to follow along with me or code along, you can. So I will kind of move a little bit more slowly, share links as I go, and let's get started here. So the first thing I'm going to do is go right back to the Vue documentation. Great, so get started usually is a good signal, and I am looking for a command I can run that will get me started with a new Vue app. There we go, npm init Vue at latest. So we ran this last time. Again, I'm going to put this in the chat. And we will run this. So let me close out all of these old files. And we will create a new project according to the instructions of the CLI. Okay, great. So Vue project, let's actually call this to-do app, because that's what we're building. And pretty much we're going to say no to everything. No, great. So that's all no's. And now we should have our to-do app. Oh, it's because I made it inside the first project. So let me just move there really quickly. Okay, move to-do app out a directory. There it is. Okay, and now we will go into to-do app. And when we are in the folder, the same folder as the files we just generated, we're going to run npm install, or npm I for short. And what that's going to do is read our package JSON, pull in everything we need to run this project. It's pretty lightweight, which is kind of impressive. And then once we've done that, we can kind of see what scripts we have available. And this dev one is usually the first one you want to go to when you're developing. Build will be for deploying, which we won't cover today. We'll just focus on what we need to actually develop our app. So I'll do npm run to kind of point npm to the scripts file, and then I'll type dev. Great. So we're using a build tool here called Vue3, which is also a relatively modern tool. It's known for being really fast. It's come in and actually replaced build tools across several different frameworks. I know that I use it for React. I don't know if Angular has migrated over to Vue, but it's super powerful. And basically what it's doing over the hood, under the hood rather, for Vue, it's going to be pretty simple because there isn't necessarily a build step. But I think it handles some like hot reloading for us. So when I save files and I see things reload here without a full page refresh, I think that's going to be powered by Vue. And then I think we have to configure this a little bit more. But if we're using ES6 syntax or anything that's a little bit more modern, and we want to transpile that backward so that older browsers can run our front-end code, Vue would take care of that as well. It's a little confusing to Vue versus Vue, but Vue is the build tool and Vue is our UI framework with this distinctive Vue logo. Great, so this is kind of like our starting point. Anytime we make a new Vue project, we're going to run these steps and we're going to have the same generated code. And so actually the first thing I'm going to do here, just so we can really work from scratch, I'm actually just going to come in and delete a lot of stuff. So I will delete this logo and you'll see things light up red in my console. I'm actually going to clear out the components folder. We'll use it later, but we don't need any of these built-ins right now. There we go, there's our red. I'm going to clear this out. I'm going to clear out our main here. That's a component we don't have anymore. And I'm actually really just going to say hello world. And I'll put that in an H1 tag, keep it really simple. And I'm not even going to bother with any of these styles. We may use this, but I won't bother with that for now. I just want to keep it really simple. All right, so that's pretty easy to wrap our heads around. It's just a simple page with one H1 that is showing hello world, managed by Vue. So let's take a second and kind of orient ourselves in what is in a Vue file. So what I have here is what Vue calls a single file component, SFC for short. And the reason it's called that is because for any, I don't know, front end thing, whether it's a whole web page or whether it's just a part of a web page, we generally have three things we're thinking about. We're thinking about the JavaScript, what's actually going to run on the page when it loads. So I'm going to log hi from JS. Cool. So that's thing number one. This is kind of our ability to kind of add functionality, control what happens on the page. The second thing is going to be our markup. There's an interesting relationship between JavaScript and markup where JavaScript can actually write markup, but ultimately, yes, app.vue is used to write code on Vue. Yeah, that's right. This Vue extension is unique to Vue, and so all of our Vue code is going to go in here. But just to clarify, when I say that there's JavaScript happening in here, that's maybe what's interesting about this single file component. There are actually multiple languages within this one Vue file. And so that can take a second to get used to. So like I said, up here we have JavaScript. You know, I can do my normal let count equal 2 thing. And that can show up in the console. And then down here, we're going to do markup. I'm going to get to this question in just a sec. We can do markup. So this is just HTML, basically, right? Hello world. I can render a text input, for example. That's all kind of standard. We're familiar with basic HTML ideas. And then also I can do an image here. I don't have a, let's see, let's get a cute dog image. Great. That's a cute dog. Oh, computer's a little bit slow here. Copy image address, and then I will put that in the source here. And let's see if that shows up in our app. Sweet. So all of this is the HTML we know and love. So script is JavaScript, template is HTML, and then finally style is CSS. We won't worry about the scope thing just yet, but let me just demo, like if I add, if I say all of my H1s should be red, I can just add that quick CSS. Great, that's there. And then I can maybe go in a little bit more specifically and say that like this one is going to be, it's going to have the class green. I can really easily target that with CSS and say that needs to be green. Great, so that's what we'd expect to see. So just to make sure I've answered this first question, app.view is used to write code on Vue. This is, and actually the second question, will all the HTML and CSS go to the app view, or will we need to connect them? So they will all go in this file. And we don't really need to do any extra work to connect them. Normally we have our index.html and we pull in everything manually. We still are pulling in this main Vue file, but Vue wrote this for us. And then once we've pulled in the main file, Vue is going to make sure everything is connected, everything stays in sync, which is actually kind of nice. There's another question here. Why do you make it part of your components? I want to make sure I'm answering this correctly. So let me know if I don't quite answer the question. But I'm assuming it looks like the app view is inside the components folder. And I will cover like components in general. So app.view actually isn't inside the components folder. And for now, I'm just going to delete that to avoid confusion. Components are a really powerful idea, but we're going to kind of move into that next. So for now, app is just our root level Vue file. And once we feel like this file is actually too big, or there's opportunity to actually like move things out of it that we might want to reuse or repeat, that's when we're going to start thinking about components. Okay, awesome. Cool. So there's your basic Vue setup. So one thing you might notice as I'm working is that I have this really nice syntax highlighting in VS Code. So I prefer to code in VS Code. Obviously, this is non-standard, right? The Vue extension is kind of a new thing. So how do I get that? Well, there's a really handy extension for Vue that actually is providing this from me. So I want to make sure everybody else can download this if they're coding along. So here's the name of the extension. It's called Vue3. I'm going to post the link in the chat here. So go ahead and install that in VS Code. If you're coding along, you can make sure it is running by just bringing it up here and making sure when you click on it, it says this extension is enabled globally. But that's really going to be helpful because it kind of teaches VS Code how to read your Vue files. So coming back here, I'm going to clear a few of these things out here. I don't think we need these styles. This is just for demo. And I don't think we need this either. So with our basic, like, okay, here's what we have to work with. Here's JavaScript. Here's markup. Here's styling. For me, that's actually really helpful. It's like, okay, here are the three basic technologies I'm familiar with in front-end world. I can kind of see how we might make things happen. And so picking up where we were last time, I actually want to kind of revisit this to-dos example. And I want to use that as a way of talking about the composition API versus the options API. So and I'll just write this down for clarity. The composition API is new in Vue3. And the options API is the older API. You'll still see this around sometimes, but the composition API is definitely the new API and what I recommend folks code in going forward. I'm going to walk through an options API example just so we can see honestly how much better the composition API is. So that's, I think, where we will come back to this to-do app example. Okay, so let's write to-do up here. And that'll kind of, oh, there we go. And then we're actually going to remove this setup tag here, and I'll show you why in a second. And we're going to replace that with export default. And then that is going to have a data function. Actually, I'll just write it like this, which will return to-dos as an empty array. And I'll actually reach back into our old project here, and I'm going to steal the to-dos that we wrote because those are helpful as a starting point. Okay, so what are we doing here? We're basically saying, okay, Vue, when you start up, we're going to have some data available, and that data is going to include some to-dos, and here's what the to-dos will look like. So with that, let's actually get something visual going. How can we take advantage of this data in our template? Well, to start, let's just go down here and let's create an unordered list. And let's, inside this unordered list, just print out the to-dos value. Great, so it did its best. It kind of stringified the JSON, and I think that's pretty reasonable. We can kind of see that this matches the data we passed in. So that's like what's available to us here. But that's interesting. Right now, it's actually giving me a little error message. It's saying the template root wants exactly one element. And so to fix that, I'm actually just going to wrap this all in a div, and that will make the error go away. My sense for this is basically it's a little bit easier for Vue to manage one child as opposed to like 2 children. Doesn't make a big difference to us. It's just a div we're going to work inside, but that's what the error message was. Anyway, back to it. So the next thing we want to do is get these actually looking like to-dos. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a list item, and we're going to use our favorite directive, which is v4. And that's going to be equal to do in to-dos. And this to-dos value is what really matters here. That's what's referencing the data. And it basically means this element is going to get repeated for each of those. And very helpfully, we're getting another red squiggly, and it's because we're missing a key. And we won't go too much into what the key is for, but it is something that you need when you're using lists. So the key is some element of the each to-do that kind of distinguishes it. In Firebase, for example, we had our unique IDs that were getting generated every time we added a record. It's a similar idea. Basically, that helps us just make sure we're pointing at the right to-do without having to read the entire text and is completed, the entire data of it. So what I'm going to do to solve this is I'm going to write key to-do.id, which does not exist yet. And I'm going to go up to our to-dos and I'm going to add an ID field. So ID, and I'm going to make sure it's unique for each of them. So 0, 1, 2. And then we've got our red squiggly line went away. And Vue is going to be able to render this list for us. And we will place our to-do inside and we'll render the to-do text. So that's what we have here. That looks pretty good. It's an unordered list. It's got all the text we'd expect. And the compiler, or rather the VS Code extension, seems happy about what we've given it. So the next thing, and we kind of covered this before, is how we actually get the is complete value rendering here. So I'm going to just add an input here, and we want that to be a checkbox. And we want this checkbox, it's an input, right? So it accepts user input. It can be on or off, but we want it to be actually connected to the underlying data. So you can see here, the underlying data says that go to grocery store is true, but when I reload my page, it's not there. So that's not correct. So we need to link these somehow. And the way we're going to do this is with another directive called vModel. All right, so let me just bring up the docs for vModel. I think that's always a helpful practice, vModel. And I will post these in the chat. And we can see that it's limited to a few elements. Input is one of them. They don't seem to have an example here, but I'll provide an example. And basically what this does is it links data in the JavaScript representation of what the data is with actual UI elements. So in this case, we want to link the is complete on each to do with this checkbox here. So the way we do that is we go vModel, and that's going to be linked to do dot is completed, or is complete. Yeah, is complete. Great. So if I, oh, it actually hot reloaded. So you can see that's accurate. And now if I come in here and I start changing these like at the data layer, you will see that they also update here. And so now everything is kind of wired up in a more meaningful way. So I think this is a good kind of like place to pause and kind of recap what we've done. So we've told Vue that our app has access to the following data, which are some to-dos, which have IDs, text, and an is complete field. This is all JavaScript. We've come into our template. We've said we're going to have an H1 that labels our app, and then we want an unordered list full of list elements that include a checkbox, which reflects whether the to-do is complete or not, and then the actual to-do text. Not really doing anything with styles right now, but I don't know if we wanted to do something fun. We could say like, each of these list items has a class to-do, and each of those to-dos has blue text. So color, I like Dodger blue. Cool. Not necessarily the prettiest thing in the world, but we've got all the parts moving, which is nice. So this is a great start. But you may notice it's a little unclear what happens when I actually click on this checkbox. Like when I reload the page, we can see, oh yeah, that matches this data. But what's actually happening under the hood is this data is being changed whenever I do these clicks. And it would be really great to have a way of actually looking at that. And the way to do that is, well, there are a couple different ways, but the one I'm going to stick with is another element of the options API, which is the watch property on each component. And technically our app is a component, but it also has a kind of special meaning too. So we'll just do, let me actually pull up an existing, yeah, cool. So we'll go, all right, here's our watch. It's going to be an object. It's going to point at to-dos, and that's going to get a handler, which is going to get called when to-dos change. And actually, let me change this syntax a little bit. There we go. So console log to-dos changed. Aha, all right, so it looks like something is wrong. We've set up our watch, it's pointing at to-dos, but the handler that we would expect to fire is not actually firing. And so for this, I'm actually going to modify the way we're linking our is complete just a little bit. So I like to basically isolate the value of the input from what happens when it changes. vModel kind of handles all of that together. But what we're going to do is actually remove vModel, and we're going to say, this is a checkbox. It is going to be checked when the to-do dot is complete value is true. And so what we've basically done is we've made this read only. Now, I don't, yeah, that is updating the value of the checkbox like at the DOM level, but not a layer deeper. So basically right now, this is a read-only element. And so we need to add back in what happens on change. So the way we do that is with yet another directive. This is the vOn directive. And I won't share a link for this. If you click the vModel link, it's in the same page. So you can just click the search button up here or scroll down to it. And this is for attaching event listeners to elements. And so we can basically, for this element, this is an input. And so we want to watch what happens when it changes. So vOn change, and then that needs to point to a method. Kind of bear with me for this methods thing. We're using the older options API, so we're going to do this in a cleaner way later. So don't feel like you need to memorize this exactly. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, we're going to call on to do change, a method we haven't written yet, with the to do. And then we're going to come up here to our JavaScript, and we're going to say, all right, we also, in addition to the watch, in addition to the data, we have methods. And one of those methods is called on to do change. And we're going to set that up as a function, which gets a to do. I'm going to console log this out to, comment this out to avoid confusion. I'm going to add a new console log with the to do to measure whether this is actually working. So let's reload just to be safe. And we should see a console log with the to do. There we go. Text, go to grocery store. That matches. And you can see that it's not responding at all to what I'm doing here because this incomplete is staying false. Oh boy. Not letting me expand it. Anyway, you can see is complete here is equal to false, and we want that to toggle. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, when that happens, we are going to actually modify the to-dos data. And we do that by reaching into this, which is kind of a reference to the whole component, which has to-dos. And we're going to set that equal to the existing value of this to-dos. And we're going to map over it. And that's going to give us like what the current value is. And I'm actually going to call this the last value. And I'm using an arrow function here, so slightly different syntax. And then we're going to basically run this for every last to do. So I'll maybe name that last to do to be a little more specific. Great. So if last to do.id equals to do.id, then what I want to do is I want to return a new to do, which is going to have the last to do all the same values, except is completed, will be not last to do is complete. So this will toggle it back and forth. And if it doesn't match this case, I just want to return exactly what the last to do was. Great. So let's see what that does. I don't think we should see any real change in the console or visually. Just no errors. That's a good sign. So the next thing to check is, okay, well, is our watcher working now? And it looks like it is. To-dos changed. It's correctly seeing that when I click that, all of the to-dos have changed. So, with this, we're going to kind of put this particular example down, but we can imagine maybe I want to write to Firebase here, or maybe I want to write to local storage here, so that the next time I load the page, all of my to-dos and their state are there and ready to go. We're going to implement that, but to do that, I actually want to switch over to the composition API. So quick review, what we just looked at is the options API. This is older syntax. It's still available in Vue3. You're going to see plenty of Vue written with it. But the mental model of it is kind of your component, your app is this object with all these different properties. And you'll need to dig into the documentation to figure out what they are beyond what I've already taught you. From my perspective, these are like maybe the most important ones: watch, methods, and data. They all behave a little bit differently. It's a little bit complicated to keep track of all of them. And you also notice that, like, I mentioned wanting to write to local storage. It's kind of hard to trace the path of what happens in our app when we actually modify a to-do. Like, you can see we start here, we have to go to this on to-do change function, we have to reset the to-dos, and then we have to go up here into the to-dos watcher handler. And then we have to, maybe save to local storage. So there's this kind of, like, I don't know, ergonomics thing, like just visual sensibility thing, where we have to look in a bunch of places for logic that covers like things. And what the composition API solves for us is basically we can group like things, and we have just a little bit less to learn in terms of like what the Vue API surface area is. So I will go ahead and save this file with a .old extension, or maybe I'll call it like .options API. And we will leave that there. I'm going to make sure I save this code. If it's something that's useful to poke around, I can make this available to everyone. And now we're going to kind of modify this to use a newer composition API and maybe add a little features, a few features. So the first thing I'm going to do is just comment out what we have here. We're going to see some errors, but it's okay. Basically, I'll use this commented block as an indication of whether we've migrated everything over yet. All right, so everything left, that's okay. First thing we're doing is script is now script startup. And this basically tells Vue that this is going to run once when the component mounts. I'd say this is kind of boilerplate. You don't totally need to understand how it works. This is what Vue is going to give you when it generates its default setup. So no need to memorize this. Then from here, I'm going to start with representing my to-dos. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to cut this out of the comment. And I'm going to say, let to-dos equal this array. I have to do a little cleanup here. Great. So one call out here, in JavaScript world, you'll see let and const interchangeably. There are strong opinions about whether you should use let and const as intended. You'll notice me use let exclusively. That's a personal preference. It's not right, it's not wrong. If you like const, stick with const. I like using let because it's a little bit simpler. I only have to worry about one way of declaring variables. And then beyond that, there's a little bit of complexity to how const works. So if I do like const number, equals 2, and then I try to set number equal to 3, the browser should say, what are you thinking, Gus? You can't assign. And that's great. But it gets a little weird where if number is like an object with a value 2, and I set value equal to 3, the browser's not really going to help me out. And call me like, I don't know, suspicious or paranoid or whatever, but I don't really want to start relying on a feature that's not really going to help me out in all cases. So I found that this can give me and other beginners like a false sense of security, which is why I like to stick with let. Having said that, there is nothing wrong with const. I work in code bases where they prefer const, where they prefer let. Do what works for you. Great. So we've declared our to-dos variable. So that's just like a thing that exists in JavaScript. So if I log that, great. It only exists in our console for now. So let's tell Vue about this. And we're going to do that by importing ref from Vue. And what ref is, it's short for reference, and it's basically a function that's going to make Vue aware of our to-dos. And it's going to give us the ability to interact with them in a way that our UI can respond to. So let me show you what that means. For step one, I'm going to wrap all of my to-dos in a ref. And now when this console log happens, I don't know what that is, right? That's a little bit complicated. To make it simple, all I have to do is pull off ref value, and we should see our simple to-dos again. There is a proxy around them, which can be a little bit complicated, but you can still open up this target here and see your raw values. So I would kind of not worry about the proxy. It's just a little extra thing that Vue is adding in to keep track of what the value is. So great, like we have our to-dos, Vue knows about them. We basically migrated this whole data block, so we can just get rid of that. And so let's actually show our to-dos in the UI. And it's actually going to be pretty similar. In fact, let me just cross-reference my I actually, the reason I'm kind of tripped up here is I'm pretty sure it should be able to respond just to this. But not to worry, whenever something is not working as expected, you kind of log what's not working as expected, and you cross-reference the docs. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to look for an example of list rendering. And here's what we have. So that looks like our to-dos, ref, message, v4. So to me, that actually looks like that matches and should work. So let's just walk through and see what's going wrong here. One difference that I'm noticing is the let. I don't think that would make a difference, but just a sanity check, let's do a const message, and we'll set that to ref hello world, and we'll see if we can get this printing out. This is a good live debugging session. So I'll add a paragraph and I'll say, what's our message? Okay, message was accessed during render, but it is not defined on instance. Okay. So that's actually really helpful. And I think the way we're going to solve this is by finding some way of connecting this value to the actual component we're in. So let me go see if I can find something specific to the composition API that can help me out here. So maybe we've got examples. This is a really basic one. Template h1 message. So we import our ref from Vue. We set our message equal to a ref. And then we're able to use that directly in our template. Wow, okay, so just as a sanity check, I'm gonna just see what happens when I run this locally. So I'll paste that there, restart. And that is actually working. And that's interesting because that tells me that unexpectedly, there is some difference between what we have written in this example, which is kind of a surprise to me because these look pretty much identical in my opinion. So I guess thing number one, let's try simplifying a little bit. message up here. Let's get rid of this unordered list. Let's get rid of our to-do color. Let's make sure that's even still responding. And we'll even just get rid of this for now. Okay, so now we have it down to kind of the bare essentials. I'm actually, this is actually really kind of interesting to me. The fact that this works and what we have initially doesn't, I would say that these are identical. And so this is really kind of fascinating. We won't let this block us up. If we're not able to solve this in a couple here, I'll just build out from this as a starting point, and I can kind of debug a little bit further. But yeah, that's really interesting. So just going line by line, script startup, import ref from Vue, const message equals ref hello world. And then we come to the end of our script tag. We have our template. In this case, they only have one H1. I'd be very surprised if that makes a difference, but let's give it a try. That does not make a difference. Okay. So I will stick with this approach of kind of building out from what we know works. So we have this example, and I will just paste this in. Oh, thank you so much. That's exactly it. Setup versus startup. Perfect. All right. Thank you so much. All right. Much better. Okay. Let's get back on track here. To-dos. And then we render our to-dos. That's great. Cool. That was a great catch. It goes to show that my own debugging methodology didn't totally work there. But thanks for catching that. Cool. So back on track, we've got our to-dos rendering. We have a few things that are different though. So this on to-do change, well, that was defined in methods. And so I assume that if I try to call that, it'll error out for me. Yeah, that's Vue doesn't know what that is. So it's actually even simpler to do this with the composition API. I'm literally just going to write a function called let on to-do change, and I'm going to make it exactly like what we had before, with actually one minor modification. So I'll just copy the body here, and I'll delete what's left, and paste that in here, and to do. Cool. So the difference here is that instead of this to-dos, well, we have this ref that we can write to, and we can say to-dos dot value, and that will actually be the same thing. So if I do this, now no error being thrown, and under the hood, this is actually being written. So the last thing we want to do is actually confirm that it's being written, and that's this watch block here. So this is a really cool part of the composition API, in my opinion, which is this async, basically watch effect import. So actually, let me grab what I used for my demo, watch effect. Yeah. And basically what this is a function which can be asynchronous, which is really helpful when we're writing data to the backend or fetching data. And it will basically run once when the component, when the app or the component mounts, like it's placed in the DOM. And then if there are values we use inside, it will automatically rerun itself whenever we use those values. So if I just start from scratch and I write change, or maybe I'll just say watch effect, and I do nothing else, and I reload the page, we're going to see one log. And that happens because our component got mounted. But if I do something like log the value of to-dos in addition, now Vue is smart enough to make sure that this gets rerun every time the views change. So we got it once for the mount, and then again because of change. So this is actually really powerful. And you can see that we kind of get a nice separation that to me is more intuitive. So instead of me having to look at like the watchers in the export, default export, I just have like a raw function instead of the methods and a watch effect. And I can actually kind of stack these on top of each other in interesting ways. So here's an example. Let's say that we have many to-dos, and we basically want to know how many there are total. So one way of doing this would be, I could just come in here, and I think I can just go to-dos.length. Let me confirm that. Yeah. So that's one option. But you can imagine that maybe, the same way when I do a Google search, it tells me that there are this many results, even though they're not all on one page. That could be possible here. So maybe we want to come up with this number separately. And the way we could do that is actually with a watch effect. So we could have this watch effect, and it could be connected with the to-dos value, and we could say let total to-dos, it's going to be a ref, and we will start that out as actually undefined. Or you know what, we'll just say ... like we don't know, it's loading. And I will place that here. Great, so that's not very interesting. But then what we can do is when the to-dos value changes, we can say now total to-dos is going to be equal to, we'll put it in parentheses, to-dos.value.length. Great. And we could even go a step further. We could say to-dos.value, and we want to filter for to-dos where they are not completed. To-do not to-do is complete. Great, and now that goes down to 2, and whenever we change it, it stays updated. So I think this is kind of a really powerful set of tools to get started with. There's a lot more to do here for sure. And I think that in these last 10 minutes, we could either talk through declarativity or a declarative mental model, or we could go into making API calls. So if you have a preference between, how do we make requests from the UI, or let's go into the mental models that power this way of programming, let me know in the chat. I'll default to the API example if I don't see anything in the next couple, because I think that's a really practical thing to cover. Okay, cool. So we're going to adjust this a little bit. So let's say that we don't just want to render to-dos, we want to render data that we fetched from somewhere else on the internet. So I went ahead and found a cryptocurrency API that's open and free. Here's the documentation. And what I want to start, I think, is just a list of coins. So this actually looks like a great start. I'm basically going to get a list of coins with their average prices. I think that's going to be super interesting to look at. So I'll grab this link. I'll go in here, and I'm going to say coins now. I'm going to remove some of this, and I'm going to change to-do to coin. And we don't really have this is complete. There's going to be some other stuff to adjust here. And I'm actually going to just remove pretty much all of this, because the first thing I really want to do is run something when the app starts. So we're going to make this an async function. We're going to say console, or we're actually going to start with the fetch. So let URL equal what I just copied. And we're going to actually fetch that. So let's do await window.fetch this. And that will give us a raw result. And so we actually, I'll just say let raw result equal this. And we need to do another step. We need to do let result JSON equal await raw result dot JSON. Cool. So when I console log this, we should see it kind of flicker for a second, and then we should see coins pop in. That's awesome. So this is something that we fetched from somewhere else on the internet. You can imagine they're actually really good Firebase integration libraries. So you probably wouldn't use the window fetch API. You'd use an integration library. But I don't know, if you're integrating with like Google Analytics or something, you might make a manual request like this. Or, you know, if you're like we're building a front end that works on somebody else's API, that's another situation where this is super useful. So let's actually do something with these coins. So we have some cool data here. We have an icon. I'm actually interested in what that looks like. So I'll just copy that. Does not like that. Huh. That's a little disappointing. It has a Twitter URL, a website URL. Cool. Well, we can start here. So let's see what happens when we actually write these coins into Vue's like internal model. So let's go let coins equal ref. And to start, that ref is just going to be an empty array. And then when the coins come in, it's going to be coins.value equals result JSON.coins. And we'll close that out. And you can see, like, because we kind of wired it up, it's matching. We have an unordered list, but instead of text, we want to go name. So cool. We've loaded in an external resource, and we're actually showing it in our UI. I think that's pretty cool. My dream would be like if we could actually get these icons showing up. Oh shoot, is anyone else having trouble with audio right now? All right, I'm not hearing, I'm not seeing any other issues, so.
We can hear you clearly, sir.
Okay, cool. So I will, the recording should be working fine, so he can fill in that way. But anyway, my dream would be able to actually visualize these icons, but it doesn't seem to want to be able to do that. So that's okay. To start, we can just pull off some other interesting data. So let's see, like, what's the price of Bitcoin? And I might restructure this. Actually, we'll just do some divs. And we will do maybe an H2 with the coin name. And then we can do a paragraph with coin price. And let's see what else we've got. Maybe the symbol. Put that up here. Cool. So that's awesome. You can imagine how you could build like a custom coin tracker or something like this with this. I'll add one more little feature, which it would be really cool if we could decide how many coins we actually want to fetch. And so the way we're going to do that is we're going to make a let limit ref. And I'm going to start that out at 5. And then I'm going to place it in here. First, we'll turn this into a template string. And I'm going to replace limit with limit.value. And I just think this is very cool. Like Vue is actually smart enough to go. So whenever limit changes, it's going to rerun this request and put in the new limit. So just doing it manually, if I say like 10, great, we've got 10 coins back. But what I actually want to do is wire this up to an input. So I'm going to add an input right up top for maybe the best UX for this is we could have two buttons. So maybe the button for decrementing and a button for incrementing. And here we can just do, maybe we'll do it in a code block. Here is the limit. Cool. So that's a start. This is a little messy, definitely not the most beautiful app we've ever seen, but it's a start. So great. We want these buttons to increment and decrement the value here. So I think it's actually just as simple as I can do a V on click. And I can either increment or decrement just with this shorthand. And let's see how that works. Otherwise, we'll do a custom handler. There we go. So that's really cool. We can kind of make requests dynamically based on something we've configured in the UI. And this is kind of really powerful. You know, in our case, we're doing something very modest, right? We're just loading in new coins, but you can start to see how I really like the Google Maps example. For Google Maps, we're also loading in new data. I mean, we even do have like a zoom and zoom out function, which is kind of similar. But beyond that, we also have like, we're loading new data when a user drags. And it's actually a really similar idea. There just needs to be some way to determine in the kind of like JavaScript core of the app, how to coordinate actually fetching new data. And then there needs to be the actual fetch of the new data. And then you need to write it back to your actual UI. So that's about what I wanted to cover for this session. It looks like we're meeting again Saturday. And when we meet then, I'd love to go into styling a little bit more and see if we can make something that's a little bit more visual and engaging. And there are also like a lot of really interesting things to talk about this pattern of having effects and values that cause the effects to rerun. So there's just a lot to talk about here. So I think we'll leave it here. If there are any last minute questions, I could maybe take one or two of those, but otherwise we can plan to meet again Saturday. Vue is fun, but knowing the keyword, sir. I'm assuming you're talking about this keyword, and I wish I had known that keyword sooner. But yeah, Vue is really cool, really powerful. And I hope this makes a good case for why the composition API is such a big deal. I mean, you can look at this code, and for me, this feels much more readable than, for example, this that we had before. This feels like a lot more difficult to parse, and it's also a little bit more difficult to split out into components, which is another thing we can get to next time we meet. But yeah, if there are no questions, I think we can leave it there, and we'll cover even more next time we meet. So thank you all for being here. Yeah.
Okay, Gus, thank you so much for the class. Guys, if you have questions, please drop your questions. Okay. So, hello, Gus, can you speak?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, okay. So I don't think there are any questions for you. Thank you so much for this class. So guys, do you want to say anything before he goes off the call? Anyone? Okay, so we have more. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I guess the class was well understood. Thank you so much for the class today. So
Absolutely. Until next time.
Yeah, all right. Thank you. Good day. Okay, I think you just have one more question before you leave. It says, are all functions in Vue websites?
Yes. So the directives that we covered, I posted links. I'll repost here. But yeah, this is all going to be pretty well documented in the Vue website. The best resource I found was actually this examples page. So I will post this here. Oh, that's a great question. There are implementations in React.js to prevent needless re-rendering. It does apply. Let's cover this on Saturday. I do have to drop for another commitment, but I will write this question down. Manuel, this is a really good one, and we will start there on Saturday. All right,
All right,
thanks.
then. Thank you so much. Bye. So, all right, guys, see you on Saturday. He'll be back here on Saturday. And he would answer your question on Saturday. Sorry about that, Emmanuel. Okay, take care, everyone. Good night.